In 1956, British test pilot Peter Twiss became the first human to fly faster than 1,000 miles per hour in level flight aboard the Fairey Delta II. Just 15 months earlier, the exact same experimental jet had crash-landed on its belly after its engine flamed out at 30,000 feet. This is the story of how a rebuilt crash victim shattered the world airspeed record and made American aviation look slow. To understand how close Britain came to losing its most important supersonic research program before it even began, we have to go back to November 17, 1954. 30 miles from the aerodrome at RAF Boscombe Down in Wiltshire, aircraft WG-774 was taking off on its 14th test flight. Built by the Fairey Aviation Company, WG-774 was a radical, needle-nosed aircraft with razor-thin delta wings. It looked like a guided missile with a cockpit attached to it. At the controls was Peter Twiss, a former Fleet Air Arm fighter pilot known throughout the British aviation industry for his incredible calm under extreme pressure. Twiss was climbing through 30,000 feet when the instrument panel went haywire. Without warning, the fuel pressure dropped to zero, and the Rolls-Royce Avon turbojet engine suffered a complete flameout. The roaring jet thrust instantly vanished, replaced by the rushing sound of cold air over the canopy. In 1954, an engine failure in an experimental supersonic jet at 30,000 feet was almost always a fatal event. The Fairey Delta II was not a conventional glider. Its delta wing had an extremely thin profile, designed specifically to minimize drag at high speed. Without power to push air over those stubby wing surfaces, the aircraft fell through the sky with a high sink rate. What Twiss did not know at that moment was the strangely simple cause of the failure. Before takeoff, maintenance technicians had removed a loose rubber sealing strip located between an engine air intake and the outer fuselage skin to prevent it from being sucked into the engine intake. But removing that strip left an open hole. As Twiss climbed higher into the thin air, high-pressure air rushed into the internal fuselage through that open gap. The internal air pressure built up until it physically collapsed a soft, flexible fuel expansion tank inside the fuselage. That collapsed fuel tank completely choked off the supply of kerosene to the engine. Twiss was 30 miles away from the nearest runway, dropping fast with a dead engine and a dead fuel system. Standard operating procedure dictated that he eject immediately, but WG-774 was the only Fairey Delta II in existence. It represented millions of pounds of taxpayer money and years of advanced aerodynamic research. If Twiss ejected, the nation's entire supersonic research program would smash into the Wiltshire countryside and burn. Twiss unclipped his radio microphone and calmly called Boscombe Down Tower. He told them he had lost his engine and was going to try to glide the needle-nosed dart back to the runway. Gliding a high-speed delta-wing jet without engine power requires precise flying. Twiss had to pitch the long nose down into a steep dive to maintain airflow over the wings. If his speed dropped too low, the thin wings would stall and the aircraft would tumble out of control. To make matters far worse, the flight controls on the Fairey Delta II relied on hydraulic power. Because supersonic air pressure exerts tons of force on control surfaces, human muscle power alone cannot move them. With the main engine dead, the primary hydraulic pumps stopped turning. Small emergency electrical backup pumps kicked in, but they drew heavy power from the aircraft's onboard batteries. Twiss was on a strict timer. If the electrical batteries died before he reached the ground, the hydraulic controls would freeze solid, leaving him with zero control over the aircraft. For 6 agonizing minutes, Twiss glided the silent aircraft down through the clouds. He lined up with the main runway at Boscombe Down. As he approached the threshold, he activated the gear lever to lower the landing gear. The pneumatic emergency system fired, blowing the nose wheel down into its locked position. But the main landing gear, trapped deep inside the thin wing roots, refused to drop. Hydraulic pressure was simply too low to force the legs down into the airstream. Twiss was out of altitude, out of airspeed, and out of engine power. He could not abort the landing. He had to land a one-of-a-kind experimental aircraft on its belly at over 140 knots. Holding the nose wheel up as long as possible, Twiss allowed the rear of the aircraft to touch the hard tarmac. The moment the underside hit the runway, metal tore against asphalt. Sparks showered behind the jet as the fuselage scraped down the center of the strip, grinding away the belly skin, crushing the internal frame structures, and tearing off sensor antennas. The plane skidded off the runway into the grass and violently ground to a halt in a cloud of dust. Fire trucks and ambulances swarmed the scene, but before the fire crews could reach the aircraft, the side-hinged cockpit canopy unlatched. Peter Twiss climbed out of the smoking cockpit, shaken but completely uninjured. For his extraordinary skill and bravery in saving Britain's only supersonic prototype, Peter Twiss was later awarded the Queen's Commendation for valuable service in the air. But the aircraft itself was in terrible shape. Ground crews towed the mangled silver fuselage into a closed hangar at Boscombe Down. To outside observers, it looked like Britain's supersonic ambitions had ground to a sudden, humiliating end. If you enjoy these deep, factual dives into aviation engineering and historic speed records, take a second to hit the subscribe button right now. We bring you real, fully researched stories from military aviation and engineering history without hyperbole or artificial drama. Drop a comment below and let us know what famous aircraft or classic automotive story we should cover in our next video. Your suggestions directly choose our topics. Now, let's get back to how Fairey rebuilt a broken crash victim into the fastest jet on the planet. While competitors believed the Fairey Delta program was dead, Fairey Aviation quietly loaded the damaged WG774 onto a flatbed truck and transported it to their factory in Hayes, Middlesex. Over the next 8 months, a team of engineers worked in near-total secrecy to rebuild the aircraft. They didn't just repair the crushed belly, they modified the design. They fixed the internal fuel expansion tanks so a pressure buildup could never starve the engine again. They also reshaped the engine air intakes, smoothing out the internal ducting to deliver airflow more efficiently to the single Rolls-Royce Avon RA14 engine, fitted with an early reheat system, what we call an afterburner today. To understand why this aircraft was so important, we have to look at the engineering challenges of mid-1950s flight. In the early 1950s, aviation engineers faced a major barrier, shockwave drag. As an aircraft approaches the speed of sound, air cannot move out of the way fast enough. Shock waves build up along the nose and wings, creating immense aerodynamic drag and severe handling problems. American aircraft designers solved this problem by building heavy, powerful jet fighters with swept wings. But Fairey's chief engineer, Robert Lickley, chose a different solution, the tailless delta wing. By combining the main wing and tailplane into a single triangular surface, Fairey eliminated the drag caused by a traditional tail. But to make a delta wing work at supersonic speeds, it had to be impossibly thin. The Fairey Delta II wing had a thickness-to-chord ratio of less than 5%. That meant at its thickest point, the wing was only a few inches deep. Traditional aircraft wings were built out of hollow sheet metal skins riveted over internal ribs. But a thin sheet metal wing would bend or flutter under supersonic shock waves. Fairey solved this by pioneering solid machining. Engineers milled the main structural wing spars and skin panels out of solid blocks of high-strength aluminum alloy. Because the wings were so thin, traditional landing gear could not fit inside them. Fairey engineers had to design an intricate retraction gear that twisted and folded the heavy main landing gear legs at precise geometric angles so they could fit flat into the center wing roots. Then came the issue of pilot visibility. A delta wing aircraft generates lift at slow speeds by flying at a steep angle of attack, meaning the nose points high into the air during takeoffs and landings. Because the nose of the Delta II extended 17 feet in front of the pilot, a standard nose completely blocked the pilot's view of the runway during approach. Fairey's design team came up with a radical idea, the droop nose. The entire forward 10 feet of the fuselage, including the cockpit windshield, instrument panel, and rudder pedals, was mounted on a heavy hydraulic hinge. In high-speed flight, the nose stayed locked straight for optimal supersonic streamlining, but when the pilot prepared to land, he pulled a lever, and the entire nose dropped downward by 10 degrees, opening up a clear view of the runway. It was a brilliant piece of mechanical engineering. 15 years later, when British and French engineers sat down to design Concorde, they licensed Fairey's exact droop nose concept. By October 1955, the rebuilt WG-774 was back in the air over Wiltshire. During early test flights, Twiss noticed something incredible: 5 without handling troubles. Twiss and the Fairey engineering team realized that they were sitting on the fastest aircraft in the world. At that time, the official world airspeed record belonged to the United States. In August 1955, American Colonel Horace A. 16 miles per hour. The American military was proud of that mark. The F-100 Super Sabre was a modern, swept-wing fighter, and 822 miles per hour was considered a formidable speed. The world assumed that if anyone broke the record next, it would be another American military jet flying over the vast desert salt flats. Fairey Aviation decided to challenge the record, but the British Ministry of Supply offered minimal financial backing. Britain had no desert test grounds like Edwards Air Force Base. The attempt had to take place over the populated countryside of southern England. Setting an official FAI world airspeed record required strict adherence to international rules. To qualify, an aircraft had to make 2 passes in opposite directions across a measured 9-mile course. Flying in 2 opposite directions cancelled out any advantage from tailwinds. The aircraft had to maintain a strict altitude band, varying by no more than 100 meters during the run, to prove it was not using a steep dive to gain speed. Furthermore, ground radar, optical timing cameras, and onboard instruments had to record every single second of the flight. Fairey laid out a 15-kilometer timing course high above the West Sussex coast, running between Chichester and the Ford Naval Air Station. Ground cameras were set up at both locations, including optical timing gear installed near a local sewage farm in Chichester and on the airfield at Ford. On Saturday morning, March 10, 1956, weather conditions over Sussex were cold and clear. High in the stratosphere at 38,000 feet, the air temperature dropped to minus 60 degrees Celsius. Freezing air increases air density, providing maximum jet engine thrust while reducing wave drag. Peter Twiss strapped into WG-774. He wore a specialized pressure helmet and suit. Ground crews loaded the plane with a precise fuel load to keep the takeoff weight as light as possible. At 11:47 a.m., Twiss pushed the throttle forward and ignited the afterburner. The Rolls-Royce Avon engine roared, spitting a cone of blue shock diamonds from its tailpipe. The Fairey Delta II accelerated down the runway and climbed toward the Sussex coastline. Twiss leveled off at 38,000 feet over the English Channel, pointing the long nose of the Delta II directly at the Chichester entry marker. As he crossed the entry line, Twiss jammed the fuel control lever into full reheat. The acceleration pushed him back into his ejection seat. 5. Inside the cockpit, friction against the outer airframe heated the glass canopy until it was hot to the touch. The airframe creaked as thermal expansion stretched the aluminum alloy panels. To satisfy the official record rules, Twiss had to hold the aircraft within a tight altitude window while moving at 20 miles every single minute. Down on the ground, high-speed camera operators at Chichester and Ford struggled to track the silver jet screaming across the sky. Double sonic booms rattled windows across the quiet towns of Sussex below. Twiss completed the first northbound pass over Ford, shut down the afterburner, and entered a wide, sweeping turn out over the coast to line up for the return leg. Turning a jet at supersonic speeds consumes vast amounts of fuel. Twiss had to execute the banked turn with precision. If he turned too tightly, the G-forces would bleed off his kinetic energy. If he turned too wide, he would run out of fuel before reaching the second timing trap. Lining up over the water once again, Twiss pushed the throttle to the wall. The Avon engine roared. The jet crossed the southern timing trap near Chichester, completing the second pass. With his fuel gauges hovering near empty, Twiss throttled back, turned toward the airfield, and brought the heat-soaked aircraft down for a smooth landing. A brake parachute deployed from the tail, bringing WG-774 to a stop on the runway. When official timers from the Royal Aero Club analyzed the camera frames, radar data, and pressure instruments, the calculated speeds shocked everyone. They rechecked their equipment and calculated the numbers a second time. The figures were correct. On his first pass, Twiss recorded a speed of 1,117 miles per hour. On his second pass, flying in the opposite direction, he reached 1,147 miles per hour, 73. The official announcement sent shockwaves through the aviation world. Peter Twiss had not just broken Colonel Haynes's record of 822 miles per hour, he had shattered it by 310 miles per hour. That represented a 37% increase in speed in a single day, the largest single leap in the history of the world airspeed record. More importantly, Peter Twiss became the first pilot in aviation history to officially exceed 1,000 miles per hour in level flight. In Washington, American defense officials were stunned. The United States Air Force had assumed that breaking the 1,000 miles per hour barrier would be achieved by an American jet like the F-104 Starfighter. Instead, a small British aviation company operating on a tight budget had captured the record right out from under them. In England, Peter Twiss became a national hero overnight. Newspapers published the number 1,132 across front pages nationwide. The Manchester Guardian pointed out that at 1,132 miles per hour, a pilot could fly from London to Manchester in under 10 minutes. Twiss was awarded the Seagrave Trophy and was made an officer of the Order of the British Empire. The test data gathered from WG-774's record flights proved invaluable to aerodynamic researchers. Fairey built a second prototype, designated WG-777, to expand high-speed research. France's Dassault Aviation closely studied the Fairey Delta II design while developing their own Delta Wing aircraft, leading directly to the famous Mirage fighter series. Years later, the original record-breaking airframe, WG-774, was modified by the British Aircraft Corporation. Technicians removed its sharp triangular delta wings and fitted it with a curved Gothic ogival wing shape. Renamed the BAC-221, it spent years performing high-speed and low-speed flight testing, specifically to support the development of Concorde. Every time Concorde flew passengers at Mach 2 across the Atlantic, it relied on wing shape data verified by that exact same airframe. Yet the victory for Britain's fighter industry was short-lived. In 1957, just 1 year after Twiss set the speed record, British Minister of Defence Duncan Sandys published the 1957 Defence White Paper. The policy paper declared that manned fighter aircraft were obsolete and would soon be completely replaced by automated surface-to-air and air-to-air missiles. Advanced British fighter concepts, including proposed military interceptor versions of the Fairey Delta, were abruptly cancelled. Budgets were slashed and Britain's independent military aerospace industry began to shrink. The Fairey Delta II was never built as an operational fighter jet, but its place in history was secured. It proved that innovative aerodynamic design could overcome limitations in engine power, and that a small, dedicated engineering team could outperform the largest aerospace industries in the world. Today, aircraft WG-774 rests at the Royal Air Force Museum at Cosford, standing alongside other legendary aircraft from British aviation history. Its needle-like nose and thin delta wings look as striking today as they did when Peter Twiss first took off from Boscombe Down. It stands as a lasting monument to a moment in 1956 when a rebuilt prototype took to the sky and became the fastest machine on Earth.